a flicker in the dark. The air was thick with the scent of salt and ash, the ground trembling beneath Serhi's boots as he crouched in the shadow of a crumbling wall. A distant explosion lit the night, casting jagged silhouettes of Soledar's ruins against the sky. His breath caught, a shallow gasp swallowed by the low hum of drones overhead, their red lights blinking like predators' eyes. In his hand, a worn photograph of his daughter, her smile smudged by the grime of his fingers, anchored him to a world beyond this hell. The salt mines loomed below, a labyrinth of tunnels whispering secrets of a town that once thrived. Serhi, a miner turned soldier, felt the weight of the moment, a choice to move forward or stay hidden, to protect his home or lose it forever. The night was cold, January's grip tightening around Soledar, a small town in Ukraine's Donetsk region. The battle had raged for weeks, reducing homes to rubble, streets to scars. Serhi's heart pounded, not from the gunfire but from the memory of his last day in the mines, the day the bombs fell and his world changed. He wasn't a soldier then, just a man who knew the tunnels like his own veins. Now, those tunnels were a battlefield, and he was here, rifle in hand, a miner fighting for his home. A single question burned in his mind. Could he hold the line for those he loved? The answer lay in the dark, just beyond the next step. Beneath the ruins, context of the Soledar battle. In January 2023, the town of Soledar sat like a ghost in Ukraine's Donetsk region, its once thriving streets reduced to rubble and shadow. The salt mines, sprawling beneath the earth, were the heart of the town, a labyrinth of tunnels that had sustained generations of miners, now a battleground where control meant power over critical supply routes. Soledar was a linchpin, its roads connecting the front lines of Donetsk to the wider war, a choke point for moving men and supplies. The air was bitter, with temperatures plunging below freezing, coating the ground in a thin layer of frost that crunched underfoot. Snow fell in fits, blanketing the ruins, while biting winds swept across the open fields, chilling bones and resolve alike. The military situation was a tense stalemate, stretched to breaking. Ukrainian forces, a mix of volunteers and seasoned units, held fragmented lines around Soledar, their equipment a patchwork of local and foreign aid, rifles, radios, and drones that hummed like insects in the night. Opposite them, opposing forces had dug into the town's edges, fortified by weeks of entrenchment, their positions bolstered by the mine's natural defenses. Both sides were weary, worn by months of relentless fighting, yet neither could afford to yield. The mines were not just tactical, they were symbolic, a testament to a town's resilience, a prize that could shift the momentum of the broader conflict. Geographically, Soledar was a paradox. Above ground, the town was a maze of shattered buildings and cratered streets, offering little cover but endless hiding spots. Below, the salt mines stretched for miles, their tunnels cool and dry, a claustrophobic world of echoes and darkness. The mine's entrances, scattered across the landscape, were choke points, easily defended but hard to seize. Snow and ice made movement treacherous, slowing vehicles and men, while the cold drained batteries and morale. The weather was a relentless adversary, turning fingers numb and obscuring visibility with sudden flurries. Beyond Soledar, the world watched through a fractured lens. News of the battle flickered on screens in distant cities, where diplomats debated aid and sanctions, and volunteers sent blankets and medical kits to the front. The conflict was a global echo, but for those in Soledar, it was immediate. Every moment a test of endurance. Civilians, those who hadn't fled, huddled in basements, their lives tethered to the outcome of the fight, above and below their homes. In a small command post on the town's outskirts, maps were spread across a battered table, their edges marked with pencil lines tracing the mine's tunnels. Officers spoke in hushed tones, their breath visible in the cold, planning a daring push to secure a key mine entrance. The strategy was precise, but perilous. Infiltrate the tunnels, hold the position, and open a path for supply lines. It required men who knew the mines, who could navigate their depths by instinct. For Serhiy, a former miner, this was more than a mission. It was a return to the heart of his home, a chance to reclaim what war had taken. Echoes of the mines, characters and their inner worlds. Serhiy sat in the dim light of a makeshift bunker, his calloused hands resting on a worn photograph of his daughter, Larissa, her eyes bright with a child's curiosity. At 38, Serhiy was a son of Soledar, born in a small house near the salt mines, where he'd worked since he was 18. The mines were his life, cool, echoing tunnels where he'd carved out a living, their walls glistening with salt like frozen stars. When the war came, he traded his pickaxe for a rifle, driven by a quiet vow to protect the town that shaped him. His wife and daughter were safe in Lviv, but their absence was a constant ache, a hollow space where laughter used to be. He feared failing them, not returning, but he hoped his stand would mean a future where Larissa could come home. His inner world was a tangle of duty and doubt. The mines, once a place of labor and pride, were now a battlefield, their familiarity both a comfort and a curse. He carried the weight of knowing every turn, every shaft, and the responsibility it brought. At night, he dreamed of the mines as they were, quiet, alive with the rhythm of work, not war. The photograph was his tether, a reminder of why he fought, but also a fear that he might become a memory himself. Beside him was Irina, a 29-year-old radio operator from Bakhmut, her quick fingers adept at coaxing signals from battered equipment. She'd joined the army after her brother vanished in the early days of the conflict, his fate unknown. Her sharp humor masked a heart heavy with loss, and she carried a small locket with a photo of her parents, a reminder of a home she might never see again. Irina feared the silence of a broken radio, the moment when her skills couldn't bridge the gap between her unit and safety. Yet she hoped to be the voice that guided them through, her resolve a quiet fire that burned through the cold. Victor, their 42-year-old commander, was a former history teacher from Kramatorsk, his calm demeanor a steadying force. His graying hair and weathered face spoke of years spent guiding others, first in classrooms, now in war. He carried a notebook filled with letters to his son, studying abroad, each word a prayer for a future beyond the conflict. Victor feared making the wrong call, sending his unit into danger he couldn't foresee, but his hope was unshakable. A belief that every step toward Soledar's mines was a step toward peace. His steady hand and quiet words held the unit together, a father figure to those far from home. These three, Serhiy, Irina, and Victor, formed the core of a small unit tasked with securing a key mine entrance. Serhiy's knowledge of the tunnels, Irina's skill with the radio, and Victor's measured leadership were their strength, but their fears and dreams were what bound them. Serhiy's photograph, Irina's locket, and Victor's notebook were more than keepsakes. They were promises to lives left behind, to a town that deserved to live again. As they prepared to move, their hearts carried the weight of Soledar, its mines, and the hope that their stand would echo beyond the dark. Through the snow and shadows, on the way to battle. The night was a shroud over Soledar, the January cold biting through Serhiy's worn jacket as his unit moved through the snow-dusted ruins. The air was sharp, each breath a cloud that vanished into the dark. The crunch of frost under their boots was the only sound, save for the occasional creak of a collapsing roof or the distant hum of drones. The unit moved in a tight formation, their silhouettes blending with the skeletal remains of buildings, their path leading toward a salt mine entrance on the town's edge. The mission was clear: secure the entrance, hold it, and open a vital supply route. But the weight of the task hung heavy, like the snow piling on their shoulders. Serhiy led the way, his miner's instincts guiding him through streets he'd walked 1,000 times. The mines were his domain, their tunnels etched in his memory like the lines of his daughter's face. He clutched the photograph in his pocket, its edges worn but comforting, a reminder of why he navigated this frozen hell. His heart raced with every shadow, every flicker of movement. But he pushed forward, his steps steady despite the fear. The cold numbed his fingers, making his rifle feel heavier. But he knew the mine's entrance was close, a dark maw waiting to swallow them. Irina followed, her radio pack slung across her back, its antenna swaying like a reed in the wind. She adjusted the dials, her fingers stiff but precise, seeking a signal through the static. The radio was their lifeline, a thread to reinforcements and command. But the snow and ruins scrambled the waves. She whispered to herself, a habit to calm her nerves, reciting lines from a poem her mother loved. The words were a shield, keeping the dread at bay as she scanned the darkness for threats. She caught Serhiy's eye and offered a faint smile, a silent pact to keep going. Victor brought up the rear, his eyes sweeping the flanks, his voice low as he urged the unit forward. "Stay close, watch the corners." His calm was a beacon, steadying the younger soldiers whose breaths came quick and shallow. He knew Soledar's history, its mines a lifeblood for centuries, now a battlefield where every tunnel could be a trap. The terrain was unforgiving, cratered streets slick with ice, rubble that hid dangers, and open fields where snipers could wait. The snow fell thicker now, obscuring their path, but Victor's mind was on the entrance, a choke point that could change the fight. The unit passed a shattered school, its windows gaping like empty eyes, chalkboards still bearing faded lessons. Serhiy paused, his gaze lingering on a child's drawing pinned to a wall, half buried in snow. It reminded him of Larissa's sketches, her crayons bright against their small home's walls. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the mine ahead. The entrance was near a collapsed factory, its smokestack leaning like a broken promise. The air grew colder as they approached, the ground sloping downward, the scent of salt faint but unmistakable. Irina's radio crackled, a brief voice breaking through. "Hold position. Heavy activity." The signal died, leaving her cursing under her breath. She adjusted the dials again, her heart pounding. The unit needed to know if they were walking into a trap, but the static offered no answers. Victor signaled a halt, the unit crouching behind a pile of rubble. The silence was heavy, broken only by the wind and the distant thud of artillery. Serhiy's hand tightened on his rifle, his mind racing through the tunnels he knew, every turn, every shaft, every danger. The mine entrance loomed ahead, a black void framed by frost-covered beams. It was both a refuge and a risk, a place where Serhiy's knowledge could guide them, or where they could be lost forever. The unit waited, their breaths mingling with the snow, each soldier grappling with the same unspoken question. Could they hold the mines? For Serhiy, it was a chance to reclaim his home. For Irina, a test of her skill. For Victor, a duty to lead them through. The night held its breath, waiting for their next move. Into the depths, the battle begins. The salt mine entrance yawned before Serhiy's unit, a dark maw framed by frost-crusted beams, swallowing the faint moonlight that pierced the snow-laden sky. The air was heavy with the scent of salt and damp earth, the cold biting deeper as the unit descended into the tunnels. Their boots echoed on the uneven floor, the sound swallowed by the vastness of the mines. The mission was to secure this entrance, a critical node in Soledar's supply lines, but the darkness held no promises. Serhi's heart pounded, his miner's instincts warring with the soldier's fear as he led the way, his flashlight casting jagged shadows on the crystalline walls. The plan was precise. Move through the main tunnel, clear any resistance, and fortify the entrance for reinforcements. But as they advanced, the silence shattered. A sharp crack echoed, a tripwire rigged to a flare that hissed to life, bathing the tunnel in a blinding white glow. Serhi froze, his breath catching as shouts erupted from deeper within. Footsteps, fast and heavy, reverberated through the mines, and the unit's stealth was gone. The flare had exposed them, turning the tunnel into a stage where every move could be their last. Irina, clutching her radio, dropped to one knee behind a salt-crusted pillar, her fingers scrambling to restore a signal. The static was relentless, the walls blocking her transmission. "Come on," she muttered, her voice a mix of frustration and fear. The radio was their only link to the outside, to the reinforcements waiting beyond the ruins. Without it, they were alone. She glanced at Serhi, his face tense but focused, and forced herself to breathe, to keep trying. Her locket swung against her chest, a small weight grounding her in the chaos. Victor signaled for the unit to spread out, his voice low but steady. "Hold positions. Watch the corners." His eyes scanned the tunnel, its walls glinting like frozen tears, every shadow a potential threat. The mines were a labyrinth, their twists familiar to Serhi, but treacherous to the unprepared. The flare's light faded, plunging them back into near darkness, broken only by their flashlights. Then came a new sound, a low mechanical hum, faint but growing. Drones, small and agile, designed for tight spaces like these tunnels. Their red lights flickered in the distance, like fireflies with deadly intent. The battle began in earnest, not with a roar, but with a tense, suffocating rhythm. Serhi moved forward, his rifle raised, his knowledge of the mines guiding his steps. He knew this tunnel led to a wider chamber, a choke point they needed to hold. But as they neared it, a burst of gunfire erupted, sparks flying off the salt walls. The unit ducked, taking cover behind crates and jagged outcrops. Serhi's mind raced. He remembered this chamber from his mining days, a place where he'd once laughed with friends, now a battlefield. He pointed to a side tunnel, whispering to Victor, "We can flank them, cut them off." Victor nodded, his calm a lifeline in the chaos. He directed half the unit to follow Serhi, while he and the others held the main path. Irina stayed with Victor, her radio finally catching a weak signal. "Reinforcements, 2 hours," she relayed, her voice tight. 2 hours was an eternity, but it was something. She kept the channel open, her fingers trembling as she adjusted the dials, praying the signal held. The flank was a gamble. Serhi led his group through the side tunnel, its walls narrow and slick, his flashlight barely piercing the dark. The gunfire grew louder, echoing like thunder in the confined space. A sudden jolt, a grenade's concussion, shook the tunnel, sending salt dust cascading down. Serhi coughed, his eyes stinging, but he pressed on, driven by the thought of Larissa, of the photograph in his pocket. He couldn't fail her. Not here. Not in the mines he'd called home. The chamber opened before them, a cavernous space where shadows danced. The enemy was there, their silhouettes fleeting in the dim light. Serhi's group moved with precision, using the crates and machinery for cover, their movements a testament to trust and training. Victor's group joined from the main tunnel, their combined effort pinning the opposition in a crossfire. The drones buzzed closer, their lights disorienting, but Irina's voice cut through. "Left side, incoming!" Her warning saved a soldier from a stray burst, her radio now a lifeline in more ways than one. The fight was a blur of sound and motion, gunfire, shouts, the crunch of salt underfoot. Serhiy's heart pounded, but his hands were steady, his knowledge of the mines giving them an edge. A sudden twist came when the chamber's ceiling groaned, a crack spreading through the salt. The grenade had weakened it, threatening collapse. Victor's voice rang out, "Fall back to the entrance!" But Serhiy hesitated, his eyes on the chamber's far end, a secondary tunnel that could secure their flank. It was a risk, but it could turn the tide. He looked to Victor, who nodded, trusting his miner's instinct. The unit fought on, their resolve unbroken despite the odds. Serhiy's knowledge, Irina's persistence, and Victor's leadership held them together, each moment a testament to their bond. The chamber was theirs, but the mines were vast, and the battle was far from over, a stand in the shadows, the sacrifice and turning point. The chamber in Soledar's salt mines was a cathedral of salt and shadow, its walls glinting faintly under the unit's flickering flashlights. The air was thick with dust, the echo of gunfire fading into a tense quiet, broken only by the distant hum of drones and the creak of the unstable ceiling above. Serhiy's unit had secured the chamber, but the victory was fragile, the enemy regrouping in the deeper tunnels. The mine entrance, their primary objective, was still contested, and the clock was ticking. Reinforcements were hours away, and the ceiling's cracks warned of collapse. Every moment in the mines was a gamble, and the weight of it pressed on every heart. Serhiy crouched behind a rusted mining cart, his rifle steady, his eyes scanning the tunnel ahead. The photograph of his daughter, Larissa, burned in his pocket, a silent promise to return to her. He knew these tunnels better than anyone, their twists and dead ends as familiar as his own hands. But that knowledge came with a burden. He could see the path to victory, a narrow secondary tunnel that could outflank the enemy and secure the entrance. It was a dangerous route, exposed and unstable, but it could shift the battle's tide. His heart pounded, torn between the safety of holding position and the chance to end the fight. Irina knelt nearby, her radio crackling with faint voices, her fingers working tirelessly to maintain the signal. The static was relentless, but she'd managed to relay their position, buying time for reinforcements. Her locket swung gently as she moved, a reminder of her parents, of why she fought to keep the unit connected. She caught Serhiy's glance, sensing his hesitation, and whispered, "We trust you." Her words were a spark, igniting his resolve, but also a weight. He knew the cost of leading them into the dark. Victor, positioned near the chamber's entrance, surveyed the unit. His calm was a tether, but his eyes betrayed the strain of command. The notebook in his pocket, filled with letters to his son, felt heavier now, each word a prayer for a future beyond this war. The ceiling groaned again, a low rumble that sent salt dust drifting down like snow. He knew they couldn't hold the chamber long, not with the drones circling closer and the enemy regrouping. "We need to move," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "Serhiy, what's the play?" Serhiy pointed to the secondary tunnel, its entrance a narrow slit barely visible in the gloom. "It loops around their position," he said, his voice low. "We can cut them off, secure the entrance, but it's tight and the ceiling's weak." The words hung heavy. Tight meant vulnerable, weak meant deadly. Victor's eyes met his, weighing the risk. The unit was exhausted, their numbers thinned by the night's toll, but holding the chamber without securing the entrance was a losing game. Someone had to take the tunnel, and Serhiy knew it had to be him. "I'll lead," Serhiy said, his voice quieter than the dust settling around them. Victor hesitated, then nodded, gripping his shoulder. "We're with you," he said. But Serhiy knew the truth. He'd go first, alone, to scout the path. If the tunnel collapsed, or the enemy was waiting, he'd bear the brunt. He thought of Larissa, her smile, the sunflower fields they'd run through. He thought of Soledar, its mines his home, now a battlefield. This was his stand, his sacrifice for a chance to save them all. Serhiy moved into the tunnel, his flashlight cutting a thin beam through the dark. The walls were slick with salt, the air cold and heavy. Behind him, the unit followed, their steps cautious, their trust in him absolute. The tunnel narrowed, the ceiling low, forcing them to crouch. A drone's hum grew louder, its light flickering at the tunnel's end. Serhiy's heart raced, but he pressed on, his miner's instincts guiding each step. Then, a crack, a sharp snap above, and salt rained down. He froze, signaling the others to stop. The ceiling was giving way, the tunnel a trap. In that moment, Serhiy made his choice. He sprinted forward toward the drone, firing a burst to draw its attention. The noise echoed, pulling the enemy's focus from the unit. "Go back!" he shouted, his voice raw. The unit hesitated, but Victor's command cut through. "Move!" As they retreated, Serhiy pushed deeper, his flashlight bouncing off the walls, his shots a beacon in the dark. The drone veered toward him, and the enemy followed, their shouts echoing. The ceiling groaned louder, a final warning. The tunnel held, but barely. Serhiy reached the far end, a junction that opened to the entrance's defenses. His distraction had worked. The enemy was drawn away, giving the unit time to fortify the chamber. Irina's radio crackled with confirmation. Reinforcements were closer, guided by her signal. Victor's voice rallied the unit, their positions stronger now. Serhiy slumped against the wall, his breath ragged, the photograph in his pocket a lifeline. He'd risked everything, and the entrance was within reach. The sacrifice had bought them time, a chance to hold the mines, to keep Soledar's heart beating. Dust and dawn, aftermath and the cost. The first rays of dawn filtered through the shattered streets above Soledar, casting a pale, ghostly light that barely reached the salt mine's entrance. The air was heavy with the scent of frost and ash, the silence profound after the chaos of the night. The chamber, with its glistening salt walls, stood secure, a hard-won foothold in the labyrinth beneath the town. The unit had held the line, their position a fragile thread tying Soledar's supply routes to the broader fight. But the cost lingered in the stillness, etched in the dust that coated their boots and the shadows that clung to their faces. Serhiy leaned against a crate, his body weary, his rifle resting across his knees. The photograph of his daughter, Larissa, was in his hand, its edges curled and smudged with salt. He'd made it through the tunnel, his desperate run drawing the enemy's fire and saving the unit from a collapsing ceiling. His chest heaved, each breath a reminder that he was still here, still fighting. But the mines felt different now. Not the home he'd known, but a scarred relic of a life interrupted. He traced Larissa's face with his thumb, wondering if she'd understand the weight of his choice, the moment he'd run toward danger to protect others. Irina sat nearby, her radio silent at last, its batteries drained, but its purpose fulfilled. She'd kept the signal alive long enough to guide reinforcements, now only an hour away. Her locket lay open in her palm, the photo of her parents, a faint comfort against the exhaustion. She'd saved lives in the chaos, her quick hands bandaging wounds, her voice a lifeline through the static. But the faces of those she couldn't help haunted her, their silence louder than the gunfire. She looked at Serhiy, his survival a small victory in a night of losses, and felt a flicker of relief. They'd held together, somehow. Victor stood at the chamber's edge, his eyes scanning the tunnel where the enemy had retreated. His notebook, filled with letters to his son, was tucked safely in his pocket, a weight that grounded him. The unit had lost 2 soldiers in the night, their absence a wound that no strategy could mend. He felt their loss in his bones, a commander's burden, but he carried it quietly, his face a mask of resolve. The entrance was theirs, a step toward securing Soledar's supply lines, but the mines stretched on and the battle was far from done. He thought of his son, safe abroad, and hoped this fight would mean a home worth returning to. The aftermath was a tapestry of ruin and resilience. The chamber's floor was littered with salt dust and shell casings, the walls scarred by gunfire, their crystalline sheen dulled by smoke. A broken flashlight lay abandoned, its beam extinguished like a star swallowed by dawn. Above ground, Soledar's ruins stood silent, the snow settling on collapsed roofs and empty streets. The mine entrance, now fortified, was a beacon for the reinforcements inching closer, their engines a faint hum in the distance. The unit's stand had shifted the balance, opening a path for supplies to flow, a lifeline for the town and the front beyond. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts. Serhiy saw Larissa's smile in his mind, a promise that kept him moving. Irina tucked her locket away, her fingers lingering on its clasp, a vow to keep fighting. Victor walked among the unit, checking their gear, offering a nod or a quiet word. His presence was a steady hand, guiding them through the weight of survival. The losses were real, but so was the ground they'd gained, not just in meters, but in the hope that Soledar could endure. As the dawn brightened, a distant cheer rose from the surface. Reinforcements crossing the final stretch, their silhouettes faint against the snow. The unit looked up, their faces etched with exhaustion, but unbroken. The mines were theirs for now, a small victory in a war that stretched beyond the horizon. The silence held them, a space to breathe, to remember, to carry on for those waiting in Soledar's shadowed streets. Echoes of home, reflection and message to the viewer. The dawn over Soledar was a fragile thing, its pale light filtering through the snow-heavy clouds, casting a soft glow on the ruins above and the salt mines below. The chamber, now secure, hummed with the quiet activity of the unit as they fortified their position, their breaths visible in the cold. Serhiy sat on a crate, the photograph of his daughter, Larissa, resting in his hands. The salt dust had settled into its creases, but her smile shone through, a beacon that had carried him through the night's darkness, Lodong system. The photograph in his hands, a beacon of hope, was not just a keepsake, but a promise, a vow to return to a Soledar free from the grip of war. He thought of the tunnels, once his workplace, now a battlefield, and the weight of his choice to run into the dark, drawing the enemy's fire to save his unit. That moment, when he'd faced the drones and the collapsing tunnel, was not for glory, but for Larissa, his town, and the people he'd never met but fought for. He hoped she'd grow up in a world where the mines were just mines again, where children could run through the streets without fear. Irina stood nearby, her radio silent, her locket tucked back into her jacket. She'd written a new line in her notebook that morning. In the dark, we find each other. It was a quiet truth, born from the chaos of the night, where her voice through the static had kept the unit alive. She thought of her parents, their faces in the El Convina system, Ocket, and felt a quiet resolve to keep going, to be the voice that carried hope. Her hands, steady through the night's terror, were her offering to a fractured world, a refusal to let the darkness win. Victor leaned against a salt-crusted wall, his notebook heavy with unwritten words to his son. The mines, a place of history he'd once taught, were now his battleground, a testament to a nation's endurance. He'd led his unit through the impossible, his calm a shield against despair. The loss of 2 soldiers weighed on him, their names unspoken, but carved into his heart. Yet the entrance they'd secured was a step toward a future where his son could return to a free Ukraine, a dream worth every sacrifice. The mines, with their glistening walls, stood as a silent witness to their stand. The chamber was more than a tactical gain. It was a symbol of resilience, a refusal to let Soledar's heart stop beating. The supply route was open, a lifeline for the town and beyond. But the cost was etched in the salt dust, the silence, the weary faces of the unit. The snow outside fell gently, covering the scars of battle, a reminder that life persisted even in the harshest moments. This story of Soledar is not just about a mine or a town, it's about Serhii, a miner turned soldier, carrying his daughter's smile into battle, Irina, whose voice held the line, and Victor, whose leadership was a light in the dark. It's about the human spirit, battered but unbowed in the face of war's shadow. What does courage mean to you? Is it running into danger for those you love, keeping a signal alive against all odds, or leading others through the unthinkable? These questions linger in the salt-scented air, waiting for your answer, Ukraine. Frontline War Stories brings you these untold tales of humanity, not to glorify war, but to honor those who endure it. Subscribe to hear more stories of sacrifice, brotherhood, and hope. Share your thoughts below. What does it mean to hold fast in the dark, to fight for home, to dream of peace? Join us in reflecting on the strength it takes to face the dawn.